The phrase economic self-reliance sounds so wholesome, doesn't it? Like something your grandmother might whisper between chants while handing you a homemade remedy for capitalist fatigue. But in the modern Indian context, it's no quaint ideal. It's a full-blown geopolitical declaration, a bold middle finger to the global order that's been designed, refined, and enforced by a very particular club of Western powers. You know the kind: suits, sanctions, and suspicious smiles. India's pursuit of self-reliance isn't some sudden spiritual awakening. It's a direct response to centuries of economic exploitation, first colonial, now corporate. For years, India was the supplier of raw materials and cheap labor, the convenient back office to the world's boardrooms. America, in particular, played its part in this global dance, but always wanted to lead, and always to its own rhythm. Enter Atmanirbhar Bharat, not just a slogan, but a philosophical pivot. India began to realize that relying on imports for essentials like electronics, defense tech, pharmaceuticals, and even its own digital platforms was like building a house with someone else's bricks and expecting them not to pull one out whenever they fancied a trade war. It's economic Jenga with a partner that cheats. So India began to make its own bricks, literally and metaphorically. Indigenous manufacturing was ramped up. The Make in India movement wasn't just about jobs, it was about control. Data localization wasn't about nationalism, it was about sovereignty. And cutting trade ties with powers that profit more than they partner. Well, that's not protectionism, that's self-preservation. And let's not ignore the spiritual irony here. The land that birthed the concept of detachment is now detaching itself from Western economic overdependence. A nation of over 1 billion people bursting with youth, intellect, and innovation, finally saying, we can build our own things, we can code our own systems, we can feed ourselves, heal ourselves, and yes, trade on our terms. This doesn't mean retreating from global markets. No, it means engaging with them without begging. It means shifting from the passive role of consumer to the active role of creator. And if the terms of trade aren't fair, India now has the spine and the strategy to walk away. Because let's face it, economic cooperation with America often looks like this. India opens its markets. America floods them with goods. India shares data. America monetizes it. India seeks fair terms. America sends conditions hidden behind legalese and strategic smiles. So India said enough. Now factories are humming. Startups are booming. Supply chains are being rerouted eastward, inward, locally. Farmers are learning blockchain. Coders are learning Sanskrit. And chai sellers are learning QR codes. This isn't a copy of the Western capitalist model. It's a remix with tabla beats and a yoga mat. And when a country this large begins to believe it doesn't need handouts, that it can thrive without bending to foreign pressure, to dollar diplomacy, to imported ideologies, well, that belief becomes contagious. It spreads, it inspires, and it rewrites the rules of engagement. Geopolitics isn't just maps and borders anymore. It's chess played with drones, data, diplomacy, and dollars. And India's seat at the table has become increasingly uncomfortable. For years, it danced cautiously with the West, especially the United States, smiling at summits, signing deals, joining alliances, and tweeting in sync. But beneath the choreography was a growing sense of unease, because partnership, in the language of global power, often translates to alignment on our terms. And India's not fond of being told where to stand, not anymore. What triggered the shift? It's not one thing, it's everything. America's unpredictable foreign policy swings like a pendulum. One day it's courting India as a strategic ally against China, the next it's issuing warnings over buying oil from Russia or signing defense contracts with Iran. One administration sells weapons, the next raises tariffs. One praises India's democracy, the next lectures it on human rights, conveniently ignoring its own backyard of prison, industrial complexes, mass surveillance, and permanent warfare. This performative concern reeks of double standards. When the US bombs the Middle East, it's spreading freedom. When India buys discounted oil to protect its energy security, it's undermining global peace. Washington's moral compass seems to always point toward its own interests. Then there's the great game of alliances. NATO, UK-US, QAD, acronyms that sound like tech startups but function like strategic clubs. India gets invited to these tables but never gets to write the menu. And when India refuses to follow the script, say, by refusing to condemn Russia outright or by trading in rupees instead of dollars, eyebrows are raised in Washington. How dare a post-colonial nation exercise independent foreign policy? But India's geography demands it. It doesn't have the luxury of oceans on both sides like the US. It sits next to China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, a neighborhood that's not exactly a yoga retreat. Its relationships must be multi-directional, nuanced, transactional when necessary, but America's approach doesn't accommodate complexity. It wants black and white, ally or enemy, with us or against us. India lives in the grey. And let's not forget the economic strings attached to diplomacy. When the US offers defense deals, it's not charity, it's about locking India into expensive, long-term dependencies. When it talks about shared values, it's often followed by sanctions, threats, conditional trade terms, or covert lobbying through multinational corporations. Strategic autonomy for India increasingly looked like strategic illusion. So over time, India started to say no. No to one-sided trade expectations. No to playing deputy sheriff in America's geopolitical theatre. No to weapons deals that come with surveillance clauses. No to diplomatic puppeteering dressed up as partnership. It began turning to regional blocs, building ties with Russia, Iran, Southeast Asia, and the BRICS alliance, places where it could negotiate as an equal, not as subordinate. And every time it did, tensions with the US grew more visible, more passive-aggressive, more transactional, more strained behind the closed doors of bilateral summits. The US dollar, that green piece of paper draped in eagles and illusions, isn't just a currency, it's a weapon, a leash, a global spell cast over nations that once dared to think sovereignty meant something more than just flags and borders. India, like many others, has played under the shadow of this dollar-draped empire for decades, and only recently has the true cost begun to reveal itself, not just in rupees, but in principles, policies, and power. When people talk about the strength of the dollar, they rarely ask strength for whom, because it's not some naturally occurring miracle of trust and value. It's the result of centuries of war, trade manipulation, and petro-pacts that turned America's currency into the world's economic oxygen. And once you're breathing it, they own your lungs. India found this out every time it tried to step out of line. Want to buy oil from a sanctioned country? Sorry, the transaction must go through US-controlled financial systems. Want to trade with a neighbor in your own currency? Good luck. The dollar still lurks in the back end. It's not just the medium of exchange, it's the mechanism of control. Even Indian reserves, mostly held in dollars, become a kind of insurance premium paid to maintain investor confidence. But whose confidence? Western banks, American rating agencies, Wall Street hedge funds that see India not as a nation, but as a market ripe, volatile, and profitable. The moment India resists the prescribed model, say, by resisting dollar-based trade or implementing capital controls, it's met with downgrades, disinvestment threats, and think tank critiques dressed up as journalism. This isn't economic cooperation, it's extortion in a suit. And then there's inflation. When America prints trillions of dollars to bail out its collapsing banks, fund endless wars, or rescue over leveraged hedge funds, the ripple hits the rest of the world like a tsunami. India imports oil, tech, raw materials, all priced in this increasingly unstable currency. So America sneezes and India gets the financial flu. The exploitation is systemic. American corporations use the dollar's dominance to extract profits from Indian markets, repatriating billions while local workers get breadcrumbs. The capital flows one way, the value, the data, the labor, all flow the other. It's modern-day colonialism with a currency exchange rate. India began to see the dollar not as a neutral tool, but as a Trojan horse, one that entered its economy offering trade and prosperity, but inside carried dependency, instability, and a constant need for American approval. The push for trading in rupees, joining BRICS initiatives for alternative payment systems, stockpiling gold, and bilateral currency swap agreements wasn't a tantrum. It was a strategic awakening. Because when one nation gets to print value out of thin air, while others must earn it, borrow it, or beg for it, that's not a free market. That's financial feudalism dressed up in spreadsheets. Colonialism never really ended, it just changed clothes. Traded in redcoats for grey suits, warships for IPOs, muskets for algorithms. The empire didn't die, it was privatized. Welcome to corporate colonialism, where the conquest isn't of land, but of labor, data, markets, and minds. And India, with its vast population, rich resources, and digital revolution, has long been prime real estate on this new imperial map. Back in the day, it was the East India Company, a business with an army, that first carved up India for profit under the guise of trade. Fast forward to now, and the logos have changed, but the methods remain chillingly familiar. Large multinational corporations, many of them American, set up shop not as guests, but as governors, dictating terms, harvesting profits, and exporting the real wealth elsewhere. India opens its markets, Foreign giants swoop in. They acquire local competitors, extract user data, dominate ad revenues, and define consumer habits. Small businesses unable to match the scale or subsidies collapse. Supply chains become monopolized. Culture becomes branded. Suddenly, India isn't just importing foreign goods, it's importing a way of life, a value system, a dependency structure. That's not globalization. That's soft conquest. These corporations claim to empower India, to bring technology, jobs, and opportunity. But scratch the surface and you see the truth. Warehouses filled with underpaid workers, contract farms squeezed by price fixing, user data funneled into offshore databases, and massive profits booked in tax havens. India becomes a colony not of a country, but of a boardroom. And the legal system. It often bends to accommodate. Trade agreements come laced with investor-state dispute clauses, which means if India tries to regulate, say, environmental standards, labor rights, or data sovereignty, the corporation can sue the government in international tribunals. Democracy meets shareholder supremacy. Sovereignty gets outvoted. Even in the digital realm, India finds itself under siege. American tech giants dominate everything: search engines, social networks, app stores, payment gateways. They set the rules. They control what trends, what gets censored, what data gets harvested. They become unelected arbiters of speech, culture, and even politics, and all under the smiling mask of connectivity and innovation. Meanwhile, Indian startups, no matter how brilliant, often find themselves bought out before they can scale. The moment they become a threat, they're acquired. Talent gets absorbed, IP gets exported, innovation becomes outsourced colonization. And what does India get in return? A few jobs, some PR-friendly CSR initiatives, and the illusion of inclusion. But the profits, the real value, that's expatriated, that's reported on Wall Street, that's fed back into a global machine designed to keep power concentrated in places where brown hands rarely sign the checks. This is not just economics, it's psychology. It trains an entire generation to believe success means working for the foreign giant, not building against it. Internalizes inferiority. It globalizes dependence. The flag may have changed, but the structure remains eerily intact. In the modern world, control no longer lies solely in borders, armies, or flags. It lies in servers, algorithms, and data centers. And while the age of colonizers sailing in on wooden ships may be over, the digital colonizers arrive silently. Through your smartphone screen, your browser, your inbox. They don't ask for permission. They arrive pre-installed. That's where digital sovereignty begins, with the simple question, who really controls the digital space in which a nation exists? For India, a country with over 1 billion people increasingly connected to the internet, this question isn't abstract, it's existential. When data becomes the new oil, the one who owns the pipelines owns the future. And for far too long, those pipelines have led to Silicon Valley. American tech giants, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, have dug deep into Indian soil, not to plant trees, but to install extractive infrastructure. Not for development, but for domination. These platforms collect, monitor, analyze, and monetize Indian user behavior at an unprecedented scale. Every click, swipe, and search becomes a data point, not stored in Delhi or Mumbai, but in servers across the ocean, governed by US laws and corporate interests. This isn't just about ads, this is about surveillance, influence, control. When a foreign platform knows more about your citizens' habits, desires, and fears than your own government does, sovereignty becomes little more than a performance. It goes deeper. These companies shape narratives, control visibility, influence elections, and dictate public discourse, all while hiding behind the banner of neutral technology. But neutrality is a myth when content moderation, platform algorithms, and even policy enforcement are decided in distant boardrooms by people who don't answer to the Indian public. India's attempts to assert control through data localization laws, app bans, and digital regulation are framed in the West as authoritarian overreach. But when America does the same in the name of national security, it's seen as prudent policy. The hypocrisy is baked into the system. The moral compass of the digital world is still firmly held in American hands, and it always seems to point toward profit. The issue isn't just that foreign platforms dominate, it's that India's digital backbone is being outsourced. Cloud infrastructure, payment systems, e-commerce, logistics, even educational tools. The more dependent a country becomes on foreign digital architecture, the more vulnerable it is to economic coercion, to cyber threats, to political manipulation. The cost of non-compliance becomes exclusion from global tech ecosystems, financial sanctions, and media outrage. True digital sovereignty means not just regulating foreign players, but building resilient alternatives. It means investing in local infrastructure, protecting citizen data with domestic laws, and ensuring that the digital public square isn't owned by private foreign entities. It means recognizing that the freedom to express, transact, innovate, and connect must be governed by the people who live on the land, not the people who own the platform. For decades, the so-called global order has looked suspiciously like a monopoly board rigged in favor of the House. The institutions, rules, and currencies that define international trade and diplomacy weren't designed by consensus. They were written by victors, enforced by militaries, and wrapped in the polite language of liberalism. And at the center of it all sat the United States, self-appointed referee, banker, and enforcer, dressed up as the global protector of peace, democracy, and open markets. But the mask has slipped, the sheen is fading, and countries like India aren't just noticing, they're recalculating. India isn't walking away from a global system out of petulance. It's doing so because the old system is visibly cracking under the weight of its own hypocrisy. Rules-based order, only when it suits certain countries. Sovereignty, valid, unless you're trading with sanctioned nations. Democracy, celebrated unless it produces results that disrupt Western investments or alliances. So now, India looks east, south, and inward. It sees breast not as a counterweight, but as a prototype. It sees multipolarity not as chaos, but as liberation. It sees trade in local currencies as both rebellion and realism. Because the old global order built around the dollar, the IMF, the World Bank, and NATO-backed diplomacy, no longer reflects the balance of global power. It merely reflects the balance of debt and dependency. This new order doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need regime change wars or Hollywood narratives. It works quietly through energy deals in rupees, cross-border digital infrastructure, AI collaboration between Asian and African states, and shared tech without the embedded backdoors of surveillance capitalism. It's not an alliance of saints, but it is a coalition of survivors. Countries that have tasted the underside of Western development and now choose to define their futures on their own terms. India, with its population, technological prowess, civilizational depth, and diplomatic clout, is not content being a cog in someone else's imperial engine. It wants a steering wheel, or it's building its own vehicle. Whether it's currency swaps with Russia, oil deals with the Middle East, or semiconductor partnerships with Southeast Asia, the message is the same: a new trade language is being spoken, and the old translators are being ignored. This isn't isolationism, it's independence with strategy. It's realizing that global cooperation doesn't have to mean taking instructions from Washington, echoing Brussels, or waiting for the next G7 photo op. It can mean building systems that aren't beholden to single points of failure, politically, economically, or digitally. It can mean defining prosperity without needing validation from Wall Street or Silicon Valley. It can mean rejecting the idea that any one nation has the moral authority to police the planet while it profits from the chaos it helps create. The new global order India envisions isn't perfect. It's experimental, rough around the edges, sometimes messy. But it's built on mutual benefit, not historical dominance. It's horizontal, not vertical. It's a system where emerging powers aren't just included for diversity optics. They're architects, not apprentices.